Principles of balance, acid alkaline. This is the second in this series of principles of balance, and it is looking at foods that are acid and alkaline within the framework of expansive contractive. It's quite extraordinary and extremely useful. Acid alkaline. This model of acid alkaline, as you can see from your chart, is superimposed with the expansive contractive, which is quite important. And as we go through it, you'll understand why the two are together. But first we have to talk about the pH value of food. pH simply means power of hydrogen, and a pH 7 is neutral, and it's 1 gram of hydrogen positive ions. Acids tend to have a greater donation of proton and fewer electrons and more unstable. Acid-forming foods tend to be more corrosive, lead to inflammation, illnesses. It's not acute, it's more chronic, low level, and silent. And this is sort of the underpinning of modern illnesses. Alkaline has more electrons. Pure acid is 0, and pure alkaline is a 14, just so you have a sense of the scale. Normal pH in blood is 7.35 to 7.45. If the pH of your blood gets as low as 6.9, you'll die of diabetic coma. If your pH of your blood gets as high as 7.9, you'll die of lockjaw. The body tightens, the heart stops. On the other hand, it's extremely hard to be too alkaline. The body keeps this very tightly regulated, and it's hard to measure because you measure it 1 minute, you can measure it 10 minutes later, and it's different. Your body will keep you in balance as much as possible, and that's not because that's not a very big range, 6.9 to 7.9. It has to keep you in a much tighter range than that. Just for comparison, a pancreas has a pH of 8, and the stomach has a pH of 1.9 to 4, which of course is hydrochloric acid, which aids digestion. Saliva will change by what you eat. It can go as low as 4.6 to 7, but the closer to 7, the better you actually feel. When it's around 5, your mouth is kind of gummy and sticky, and it doesn't feel very good. So how does all this work with food? What counts is what's left behind. Some food leaves behind minerals, and some leaves acids. So acid-forming foods, processed foods, can take the alkalizing out, and they increase the acidity. So if you look at our expansive acid-forming foods, alcohol, sugar, natural sweeteners, decaf, sodas, these kinds of things, even getting into oils and refined flours and even whole grains. These are acid-forming foods. They leave behind sulfuric acid, carbonic acid, and phosphoric acid. Lower down, more contractive, are beans, fish, poultry, meat, and eggs. And even toxic chemicals from skincare products and cleaning products in your house are below that. They're contractive and very acid-forming. So starting with your beans, it's actually more acid-forming on the way down than it is above the line. Acid alkaline part 2. We discussed the acid, and now let's talk about alkalizing. When you eat an alkalizing food, what's left in your body is calcium, potassium, iron, sodium, and magnesium. So if you look at our chart, and you'll see, again, it goes from expansive to contractive, just like it did with acid-forming foods. And so our more expansive alkalizing foods, which means they're not as alkalizing as the lower, smaller contractive foods are. So coffee's interesting. Actually, it's the caffeine that is alkalizing, and then the rest of it is acid forming. So decaf would be acid forming. You see our vegetables, our fruits and juices, mushrooms, potatoes, even raw dairy, but we're going to get into the buffer foods in a little bit. And then, of course, things like actually kudzu and miso and olives and umboshi and salts and fermented foods are much more contractive and further down on the alkalizing list. Taste actually has nothing to do with whether it's acid or alkalizing. It's the result. It's what's left in your body. So lemons, which taste very sour, seem like they would be an acidic food. They're actually alkalizing. Tomatoes are acidic in taste, but they also are alkalizing because they leave minerals. After you've digested acid-forming foods, it leaves by, as I said before, carbonic acid, sulfuric acid, and phosphoric acid. And this is the diet that creates cavities and osteoporosis. Most of the food people eat in this country is acid forming. And you can eat as much as you like, but eventually your bones and teeth will go. Because what happens is your body needs to stay in balance, which I've said 50 times. And one of the things that the acidic food does is it has this marvelous reserve of alkalizing minerals to pull from, which is your bones and teeth, and it does that continually. This is why we see 7-year-olds with root canals and very bad teeth, because they're not eating alkalizing foods, they're eating only acidic foods, and it is pulling it from their teeth, and eventually it will pull it from their bones, and they will have serious issues even as a young adult with their bones if they continue down this path. However, after you've digested alkalizing forming foods, it leaves behind, as I said, potassium, magnesium, iron, calcium, and sodium, and these balance the acidic. However, it's very hard to eat just these foods because your body does not store acidic foods, and you're going to crave sugar when you are missing these minerals. When you're missing this alkalizing foods, your body actually is going to crave sugar. You can't even actually eat 80% alkalizing food. It's too much. You'll just be craving acidic foods very badly. So in terms of the minerals, they from your food or your body, they buffer the acids, and the kidneys may actually hold on to minerals. They'll get into this balance as well if you don't have enough coming in to help keep this acid alkaline balance in tow. So the reason you put salt on eggs is balance. Salt's very contractive, and it's also, and so are eggs, but salt's alkalizing and eggs are acid forming. So in the previous chart, it would have made no sense to put salt on eggs, but it makes perfect sense looking at this chart. Most people's diets, ethnic diets, are really balanced, like meat and potatoes, white flour and vegetables, whole grains and miso and sea vegetables, which is more Japanese. I mean, we actually naturally do this. You can. The other thing is when you chew, you are adding alkalization to your food. So you really want to help with reversing this acid reflux and the heartburn, and it has a lot to do with chewing, and I do discuss that later on in another slide. Acid and alkalizing foods, part 3. I want to add a few more comments about the acid alkalizing before we go into buffered foods. When you exercise, it actually creates acidic conditions in your body, but you get rid of carbonic acid as you breathe out. So increasing your movement, increasing your breathing is a really good thing. And the exercise and movement actually also increases your stomach acid, which of course helps your digestion. And another comment about food being in balanced diets. We, in this country, we might eat eggs and bacon. So you can see that's pretty acidic forming, but there's also a lot of salt that goes along with both of these. So a typical breakfast might be eggs, bacon, potatoes, toast, coffee, and orange juice. And you can see that there's a balance in that. Sushi, fish, rice, seaweed, ginger, wasabi. You can see if you look at the chart how that balances out as well. And another thing is strong body odor. When you meet someone who has just a strong body odor and you know that they're clean, that's not the issue. They are eating way too much acidic food and they cannot get rid of the strong body odor, and in particular it's probably too much meat and flour, and this is a really big issue, and they need to shift their diet in order to get rid of the strong body odor. Fruit and vegetable juices are actually extreme foods, and they should be used when you need to contrast the acidic more quickly. So in that eggs, bacon, potatoes, toast, and coffee and orange juice, you really needed that orange juice to make balance because it's extreme, but your white flour and your eggs and bacon are all over in your acid forming, even if your potatoes, but of course if they're peeled, they probably more belong in acid forming as well. You're not getting a lot of alkalizing in that particular diet. Vegans can become over-alkaline and lack protein unless they're eating a good amount of beans in their diet, maybe even as much as twice a day. So if you memorize this and learn this, you'll be able to balance your diet just when you're out in a restaurant, when you're planning menus at home. And we are going to do some menu planning, but this is really, really very key. Acid alkalizing, part 4. Buffers. As you can see, we have our list of buffer foods. Buffers have both acid and alkalizing effects. They neutralize, they help bring balance to either side. They all have protein and calcium. So you see yogurt, even some butter, coconut butter, tofu, cheese. They have some for both sides. They contain calcium and protein. Calcium, of course, is alkalizing. Protein is acidic. Coffee with milk, cheeseburgers, yogurt, fruit, and nuts, milk and cookies, cheese and fruit, cheese and bread. These are ways we use buffers in our standard diet. You can balance without dairy, without these dairy buffers. Maybe having the tofu or the coconut is good. But you just have to eat more vegetables with your meat. You have to make sure you're doing both sides of the equation. Tofu is a buffer when it's made from calcium carbonate, but it's not as strong a buffer as dairy is. When you're too stressed and contracted, you're really going to go for these acid-forming expansive foods. So instead of reaching for Ben and Jerry's and alcohol, if you can have some real fruit juice, which is an extreme food, but not as extreme as alcohol or drugs or ice cream, it will allow you to settle more, and it'll take the edge off, and then you can think more easily about cooking or doing something to help your body be more in balance. This contractive energy is very gathering and tightening, and you can snap and go in the opposite direction, a short temper burst or blow up. And so what we're looking for is a release from this, and in food, the natural thing is to go to the expansive foods. But I'm going to tell you some other things you can do that are in contrast really to acid forming and alkalizing that have nothing to do with food. First of all, your breath and your movement will actually help adjust your pH. So if you're overworked, which is acidic forming, and you do meditation, that can be alkalizing forming, and of course that has a lot to do with breath and movement. If your anger, kindness is the alkaline antidote. Jealousy, love, stress, and peace. So there are things in our lives besides the food that can help, but food is really fast, and maybe it can bring you to a balance so that you can proceed to do sit down and meditate or relax with a calmer mind. Notes for the acid alkaline chart. Do read this. These are comments that Anne-Marie Colbin made when she did her acid alkaline chart, and I touched on most of them during the conversation, but this is in her own words. Quote. We'll end this section on acid alkaline with this quote. People who are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. How sad and how true.